I've been involved in a lot of land dealings, probably 10,000 acres or more. About 7,000 acres of it has been in Wisconsin as part of our MLG Capital operations. About half of that was the development of 19 business parks and about half development of 43 subdivisions. In addition to that, I was retained in the mid-'70s to assist Champion International to assemble 4 square miles of land in the Upper Peninsula because they were about to buy 400 and some thousand acres of timber and wanted to build a $1 billion paper and pulp mill. And before that, I was an aspiring developer in the Republic of Ireland, and I assembled 555 acres on the Shannon River in County Clare. So overall, that's about 10,000 acres. If I could take you back to the first one, I found a site in Ireland that would be suitable for a development I was aspiring to do. And I hired lawyers to front my efforts because if Irish farmers found out that there were Americans trying to buy their properties, the price would just shoot out of sight. So we acquired about 200 acres. And when we came to the next parcel, which was the largest, it was 260 acres. The owner was a widow. Her husband had left her the property and left some vested rights in the ownership to his sister. The widow wanted to sell and the sister didn't, but she had sign-off approval. And then the widow was also sharp enough to insist that she didn't want to deal with the lawyers. She wanted to deal with whoever the buyer was. That meant we had to expose the fact that this was an American source of money. And so I went over one day to meet with the two of them in their little farmhouse. I walked into the house and it had dirt floors. It was furnished like a regular house, but the floors were dirt. So you can imagine the dampness. No wonder her husband was dead. So it was a real strange, tense environment. The widow had me sit at the end of the table, and she sat on one side. Her sister-in-law sat on the other side. And the reason for this was they don't talk to each other.
Oh, that helps.
They live in this tiny little house, and they don't talk to each other. If the widow said something to me, even though the sister was probably 3-4 feet away, I had to repeat what the widow said for the sister.
This was
and
land,
vice versa.
Land assemblage and family therapy all in one.
No kidding. Anyway, ultimately, we were able to acquire the property.
So it just raises a myriad of different questions, but I suppose the central one is there a trick to this? Could somebody legitimately write a book on how land assemblages are to be done, or is every single one a different dirt floor and a different two sisters that won't talk to each other in your experience?
Well, they're all different, but there are some similarities. The similarities are there's humans involved, and humans have generally similar fundamental perspectives, and one is they don't want to be scared. They want to trust. And if they don't trust, nothing works. So of all of the tactics that I would use in doing that, they would all come down to being trustable. I'll give you an example. So the biggest assembly I did, the 4 square miles, just east of Iron Mountain, Michigan. And I had to assemble 33 parcels to make up this
contiguous
2,400 acres of contiguous land on the Niagara River, which was going to be a source of water for the paper and pulp mill.
Right.
So the first property was a gravel quarry, and the quarry owner lived on the property. I've met other quarry operators since, and they're pretty universally a bunch of tough guys.
Yeah.
So I called him from Milwaukee and set up an appointment for Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I pulled into his gravel driveway, and when I got close to the house, the driveway ended about 100 feet short of the house. So I grabbed my briefcase and I opened the door, and this booming voice says, "Stop where you are." So I look out over there. There's the guy I'm supposed to meet. He had a rifle across his chest. And I said, I tried to casually dismiss this. I said, I'm Mike Mooney. I'm the guy you talked to. And I took another step forward. Don't take another step. He says to me, "What do you want?" So I'm supposed to negotiate the acquisition of his house from 100 feet away at gunpoint. So it was clear the man was consumed with mistrust. I said, "Do you have a lawyer?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Fine. How about if you give me the name of your lawyer or if you call him and we'll set up a meeting at your lawyer's office, because I figured that would be the only way I would get to be at the same table with this guy. Now, being with his lawyer would complicate it, but that's okay. I can handle it. And then I went into Iron Mountain and went to a workman's clothing store.
Yeah.
And I bought Pendleton shirts and blue jeans and work boots. It took me 2 years to assemble all of these parcels. And I would go up on weekends and take off my dress clothes, and I put on my work boots and my blue jeans, and I would go down and sit in people's houses. And we were able to get his property, but the 33 properties consisted of the Kiwanis Christmas tree farm, a brand new subdivision, which the first house was going in, a horse ranch, a number of properties where people had lived for 3 or 4 generations. In one house, I'm sitting at this table with this woman who says, I'm 4th generation. She said, I was born on this table.
You can take the table with you. I'm not trying to assemble the table.
Right.
Well, so even with trust, as the transaction gets more and more progressed, people understand what the stakes are for Mike Mooney in this. And at a certain point, the cost basis doesn't work anymore. So is it a matter of patience? Could you just still make the numbers work because of the budget that was given to you? You know, if the price is right, I'm sure you can assemble lots of things, but how did you keep the business end of it tied down enough that the deal would still work?
Well, when you think about the number of owners in that situation, every kind of emotion possible. One of the less likely occurrences is sophisticated greed. Greed was there, but not sophisticated like the New York City guy, especially in farm country like this. The biggest barrier was their emotional attachment to the property. So in the first couple properties, I realized I wasn't making much progress because I was trying to neutralize their emotional concern. And all that did was anchor it in concrete.
Right.
I recognized that I had to get these concerns out of their head and out of their mouth. And it was easier for them to let go of them than if it was still locked up in their brain. That eased the barriers between me and getting a contract.
Walk me through the process that you would undergo with your current company if you wanted to assemble a city block downtown in Milwaukee.
Well, first of all, I'd have to start when I was a lot younger.
Right. Because of the time, it's just the time horizon.
You just really need to know your sellers to the maximum degree possible. Some of the properties we've been able to either acquire or sell, it was because we knew enough about either the buyer or the seller to know that they had to do this, which they wouldn't have ever estimated that we could have known this, but we did.
Yep.
And that gave us a big lever in doing the negotiations. We would do lots of research. We would want to learn about, were they experts in property ownership, or did sometimes people inherit stuff? Who are their lawyers? Are these guys deal makers or deal breakers?
Right.
If an assemblage was required, one of the things we would do is our due diligence with regard to the level of sanity in the local government. Do they have a history? And there isn't a lot of that, by the way.
Right, yeah.
There isn't a lot of sanity in local government. We would try to get a handle on their history of dealing with economic development opportunities and their vision and wisdom and aggressiveness in pursuing that. If we thought it was a welcome environment, we'd be more likely to do that. Like in Beloit, we assembled 850 acres to do a project called the Gateway Business Park. And I was very convinced that the city was going to jump on the bandwagon and help get this done. From the time I went into the city hall the first time to the time we turned the first spade of dirt, it was 7 years. So one key element of somebody who wants to do assemblages is patience. I mean, we would want to know all of that before we even decided to go ahead with that city block. And we would only decide to go ahead if we thought the odds were good enough that we could assemble the whole thing. It would also be helpful if we could see that this company with this LLC owned this building, but under another name, they own this one over here and this one over here, and we could get 3 in one set of negotiations.
That's
that
a
would make
different
it easier
story.
also.
Another thing that's kind of akin in some senses to assemblage is demoing or getting a contaminated site. They're all kind of a family of acquisitions under the rubric by any means necessary. Doesn't look like there's a deal here, but there is. Yeah, we're going to either put it together or we're going to tear it down to get it or we're going to fix the contamination. Did your penchant for assemblages lead you to do much of that as well, just because it's kind of a similar mentality, or were there reasons that you just said, no thanks, no demo work for us?
Well, the irony is that this table I'm sitting at is where the Wisconsin's legislation easing the ability to do based upon bad soils or contamination or whatever. And a bunch of lawyers and I sat around this table and drafted the guts of the legislation, and then somebody went up to Madison and got it passed. The irony is that I took the lead in spending about 8 months doing that, but since then we've absolutely done none because the rest of my partners are not comfortable getting involved in contaminated properties. For the most part, my experience is that the people who do that are people that often came out of the soil remediation business.
They know it very well.
It's a known quantity to them.
Yep.
And if they had built up enough financial resources, they could take that risk because to them it was less of a risk than it was for novices like us with regard to how to handle the soil remediation.